Imagine for a moment that you are on a hillside in Galilee over 2,000 years ago. The sun shines warmly on the green grass, and a gentle breeze caresses your face. Before you stands a man who is about to change the world with his words. This man is not a powerful politician, nor a famous philosopher. He is Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, preparing to deliver the most revolutionary speech in history, the Sermon on the Mount. What makes this sermon so special? Why, after 2 millennia, do we still talk about it? Brothers and sisters, prepare yourselves for a journey that will change your perspective forever. In the next few minutes, we will delve into the most impactful teachings the world has ever known, teachings that challenged empires, transformed hearts, and remain as relevant today as when they were first spoken. Before we continue, I want to ask you to leave a like on the video to support us. And if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel and also click the notification bell. God bless you. Jesus begins to speak, his voice steady yet powerful, resonating through the air and captivating every ear. This isn't merely another teaching, it's a message that has the power to change everything. Jesus is inviting everyone to a life that shatters the norms of society, a life where success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the depth of one's compassion and humility. His words challenge everyone to redefine their understanding of happiness, to see God not as a distant figure but as an intimate, guiding presence. He isn't just offering guidance, he's extending an invitation to embrace a life of true purpose, rooted in the values of a kingdom built on love, faith, and genuine connection with others. Around you, people listen with a mix of emotions. Some nod, recognizing a deep truth in Jesus' words, while others look taken aback, struggling to grasp the radical ideas he presents. Jesus' words are like a refreshing breeze, challenging the norms of the world while extending hope and purpose. Brothers and sisters, prepare yourselves for a journey that will change your perspective forever. In the next few minutes, we will delve into the most impactful teachings the world has ever known. Teachings that challenged empires, transformed hearts, and remain as relevant today as when they were first spoken. As Jesus speaks, he begins with a series of statements that turn conventional wisdom upside down. These statements, known as the Beatitudes, invite everyone listening to rethink what it truly means to be blessed. The world often views blessings as success, wealth, and status. But Jesus offers a different vision, one that redefines happiness and fulfillment at a deeper, spiritual level. He begins, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." At first, these words may sound confusing. How can being poor in spirit lead to blessing? In a society that celebrates self-sufficiency and confidence, Jesus is encouraging something radically different: humility and a dependence on God. To be poor in spirit is to recognize our own limitations, to see that we are not self-sufficient, and that we need something greater than ourselves. It's an openness, a readiness to receive God's grace. With this humility comes a sense of peace, knowing we don't have to have all the answers. This is the beginning of experiencing God's kingdom, not as a distant promise, but as a reality we can live right here, right now. Then Jesus moves to another unexpected truth. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. In a world that often urges us to hide or suppress our pain, Jesus honors the grieving heart. Mourning, he teaches, is not something to be rushed through or hidden. It's a part of being human. In acknowledging our pain, we open ourselves to God's presence and comfort. Jesus' words remind us that God is with us in our suffering, offering a comfort that goes beyond any human consolation. Mourning then becomes a pathway to healing, a journey where God meets us in our most vulnerable moments. As he continues, Jesus says, "The blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Meekness, he explains, isn't weakness. In fact, meekness is strength under control. It's choosing kindness over aggression, patience over retaliation. Picture a powerful horse, strong yet restrained. That's the image Jesus gives us, strength that is guided by love. In a world that rewards dominance, Jesus says that true strength is found in humility and gentleness. The meek, those who choose love over power, are the ones who will inherit the earth. They are grounded, unshaken, living with a confidence that comes not from forcing their will, but from knowing who they are in God's sight. Then he speaks of a different kind of hunger. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. This isn't a casual wish for things to improve. It's a deep, consuming longing for justice, truth, and goodness. Jesus isn't calling for a passive desire, but an active, relentless pursuit. Just as a thirsty person cannot ignore their need for water, those who hunger for righteousness cannot rest until they see justice in the world and in their own lives. And Jesus promises that this hunger will be filled, not by the fleeting satisfaction the world offers, but by a fulfillment that only God can provide. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Jesus calls us to choose mercy over revenge, compassion over judgment. Mercy isn't simply a feeling, it's an action, a choice to forgive even when we have every right to hold a grudge. In a world that often rewards retribution, Jesus invites us into a cycle of mercy where forgiveness flows freely, breaking the chains of resentment. By extending mercy, we invite mercy back into our own lives, creating space for healing and peace. And finally, Jesus speaks to the heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Purity of heart is not about outward appearances or rigid piety. It's about authenticity, being the same person in private as we are in public. In a world where it's easy to wear masks, Jesus calls for a life of integrity, where our actions and intentions align. Those who are pure in heart, he says, will see God. They will experience his presence, understand his ways, and find peace in a relationship built on trust and truth. Each beatitude reveals a path to a life that is both challenging and deeply fulfilling. Jesus isn't simply offering motivational phrases. He's presenting an invitation to live a life aligned with God's kingdom, a life defined not by worldly success, but by humility, compassion, and a heart open to God. These teachings set the stage for everything that follows, calling each of us to consider what it truly means to be blessed. As Jesus continues, his teachings move from personal blessings to the way we treat one another. He challenges us to see relationships through a completely different lens, one that breaks cycles of harm, resentment, and division. In a world that often promotes self-interest, Jesus calls us to live with compassion, forgiveness, and a commitment to peace. He begins with a command that turns common understanding on its head. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. These words seem difficult, even impossible. Turning the other cheek is counterintuitive. It goes against our natural instinct to defend ourselves or to retaliate when wronged. But Jesus isn't asking us to be passive or weak. He's calling us to a higher strength. By refusing to respond to evil with evil, we break the cycle of retaliation. Turning the other cheek is a way of saying, I choose not to let your actions define me. I choose peace. In this simple yet profound command, Jesus is teaching us that true strength is found in choosing love over revenge. Then he goes even further. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This command is perhaps one of the most challenging in all of his teachings. Loving our enemies doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior. It means choosing compassion over bitterness, refusing to let hatred take root in our hearts. Jesus explains why this is so important. That you may be children of your Father in heaven. God's love is impartial, extended to everyone, both good and evil. By choosing to love our enemies, we reflect that same love. Imagine the freedom of a heart that holds no grudges, a heart so filled with love that it overflows even to those who have wronged us. This is the love Jesus calls us to, a love that has the power to transform lives, to bring peace where there was conflict. Jesus' command to treat others as we would want to be treated, often known as the Golden Rule, offers a simple but powerful way to approach all relationships. He says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you." This teaching isn't just about avoiding harm, it's about actively choosing kindness, empathy, and understanding. Rather than reacting based on how others treat us, Jesus invites us to act according to the love we wish to receive. In our daily lives, This might mean forgiving a slight, choosing patience over anger, or offering a helping hand even to those who may not deserve it. The Golden Rule is a call to take the first step toward healing, to be the one who chooses love over retaliation, kindness over judgment. These teachings on human relationships are not about rules or restrictions. They are an invitation to live with a heart transformed by God's love. Jesus is inviting us to move beyond the patterns of the world, to live with compassion, forgiveness, and humility. In doing so, we become reflections of God's own heart, bringing light into relationships that might otherwise be clouded by resentment or division. His words challenge us to see every interaction as an opportunity to show grace, to choose peace, and to embody a love that goes beyond what the world expects. As Jesus speaks about relationships, he doesn't shy away from addressing one of the most common human tendencies, the habit of judging others. Do not judge, or you too will be judged, he says. In these words, Jesus isn't telling us to ignore wrongdoing or abandon our moral discernment. Instead, he calls us to approach judgment with humility, compassion, and self-awareness. When we judge others harshly, we often ignore our own imperfections. Jesus encourages us to reflect on ourselves before pointing out the flaws of others. To illustrate this, he paints a vivid, almost humorous picture. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Imagine the scene. Someone trying to remove a tiny speck from another person's eye while a huge plank sticks out of their own. This image is both absurd and profound. Jesus uses this exaggeration to remind us that we all have blind spots, that it's easier to notice the faults in others than to confront our own. He calls us to start with self-reflection, to recognize that we, too, are in need of grace. In this call to humility, Jesus invites us to practice something we might call compassionate curiosity. Instead of jumping to conclusions or making harsh assumptions, he encourages us to pause and ask, what might this person be going through? What pain, fear, or struggle might be behind their actions? This shift from judgment to empathy transforms the way we see others. When we approach others with this mindset, we move from criticism to compassion, from self-righteousness to understanding. Jesus doesn't deny the need for correction or accountability. He simply calls us to approach it with love. When we see a friend or loved one struggling, we are called to help, not with a spirit of condemnation, but with a spirit of restoration. Correcting someone in love means coming alongside them, gently guiding them without shaming or belittling. In doing so, we reflect God's own grace, offering support rather than judgment. This teaching on judgment challenges us to see others and ourselves through God's eyes, with humility and compassion. It's a reminder that we are all on a journey, that each of us has struggles and areas of growth. By letting go of harsh judgment, we open our hearts to understanding, creating a space where grace can flow freely in both directions. Jesus' words invite us to practice a love that values restoration over condemnation, a love that sees the best in others and seeks to lift them up. As Jesus continues, he turns to one of life's deepest struggles: worry. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear, he says. His words offer both a challenge and a comfort, inviting us to live with a trust that goes beyond the uncertainty of daily life. In a world where anxiety often takes center stage, Jesus' teaching on worry stands as a reminder of God's care for us, a care that is steady, intimate, and ever-present. To help us understand, Jesus gives an image from nature. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Imagine these birds, going about their lives without worry or fear. They trust that their needs will be met, not through hoarding or planning, but by simply living each day. Jesus invites us to adopt a similar trust. We are more precious than birds to God, and he reassures us that our needs do not go unnoticed. This is not a call to avoid responsibility, but a reminder to release the weight of constant worry, to let go of the need to control every outcome and trust that God is aware of every detail of our lives. Then he says something that touches the heart of our anxieties. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Jesus invites us to shift our focus from our concerns to a higher priority, God's kingdom. When we make God's purposes, his love, and his values the center of our lives, everything else falls into place. Seeking God's kingdom doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but it changes our perspective. We are no longer driven by fear or scarcity, but by trust in a Father who knows us deeply and loves us fully. Imagine the peace that could fill our lives if we lived with this trust every day. Jesus concludes with a simple but profound reminder. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. He encourages us to focus on the present, to live fully in the moment without being consumed by the what-ifs of tomorrow. Often, anxiety stems not from today's realities, but from fears of what might happen in the future. Jesus calls us to release that fear, to take life one day at a time, trusting that God is already in our tomorrow. This teaching on anxiety is an invitation to a lighter, freer life, grounded in the love and faithfulness of God. It's a call to let go of the burdens we were never meant to carry and to rest in the assurance that God sees, knows, and cares for us in ways we can hardly imagine. As we trust him more, we find that worry loses its grip, replaced by a peace that flows from knowing we are held in his hands. As Jesus speaks about priorities, he shifts our attention from temporary possessions to eternal values. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, he says. In these words, Jesus challenges us to consider what truly matters, what has lasting value. Earthly treasures, money, belongings, status may seem important, but they're vulnerable, subject to decay and loss. Jesus invites us to look beyond these fleeting gains, to see the bigger picture, and to focus on treasures that last. He offers an alternative. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Heavenly treasures are not things we can accumulate or hold. They are values and actions that reflect God's heart: kindness, compassion, generosity, forgiveness. These are treasures that can't be taken from us, treasures that grow as we give them away. Imagine the peace of knowing that our true worth isn't tied to possessions, but to the love and goodness we cultivate in our lives. Jesus is calling us to invest in things that hold eternal significance. Then he makes a simple but profound statement. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Our priorities shape who we are. When we pour our time, energy, and focus into worldly gains, our hearts follow. But when we prioritize God's values, our hearts align with him. Jesus asks us to reflect on where we are investing our lives. Are we building on foundations that will stand the test of time, or are we focusing on what will eventually fade away? Jesus goes on to say, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Here, he isn't condemning wealth itself, but the hold it can have over us. Wealth, when it becomes our master, shapes our choices, our values, and our sense of worth. Jesus is inviting us to place God above all else, to see money not as an end, but as a means to bless others and to serve. Imagine the freedom of a life where possessions don't define us, where we hold things lightly and give freely. Through these words, Jesus calls us to a life anchored in what truly matters. He offers us a perspective shift, inviting us to prioritize things that bring lasting fulfillment rather than temporary satisfaction. By focusing on heavenly treasures, we find a deeper, lasting joy that no earthly possession can provide. It's a life of purpose, grounded in values that endure. In the middle of his teachings, Jesus shares a prayer that would become foundational, a prayer that encapsulates the heart of what it means to walk with God. He begins, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." In these few words, Jesus invites us into an intimate relationship with God, one that is both reverent and personal. Calling God Father is an invitation to see him not as a distant, unapproachable being, but as a loving, caring parent. It's a reminder that we are known and cherished. Then, Jesus teaches us to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." These words are a surrender, a letting go of our own agendas and an alignment with God's. To pray for His kingdom is to ask that His values, justice, peace, and mercy, shape not only our world but our own hearts. It's an invitation to live each day in a way that reflects heaven on earth. Imagine the transformation that would happen if our lives became vessels for God's will, each of us seeking to bring His love, grace, and justice into every situation. Jesus continues with a request for our basic needs. "Give us today our daily bread." It's a simple line, yet it speaks volumes. By asking for daily bread, we're reminded to depend on God one day at a time, to live in the present rather than hoard out of fear. This prayer isn't just about physical sustenance. It's an invitation to trust God for all we need, knowing He provides for us as a loving Father. In a world that often pushes us to accumulate more, Jesus teaches us the freedom of daily reliance on God. Next, He addresses one of the most challenging aspects of human relationships, forgiveness. "And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors." Here, Jesus connects the forgiveness we receive with the forgiveness we extend to others. It's a reminder that God's mercy toward us is meant to flow through us to others. When we hold on to grudges or refuse to forgive, we close our hearts to the grace that God freely gives. But when we forgive, we open ourselves to healing and reconciliation, experiencing the peace that comes from letting go. Imagine the weight lifted when we choose forgiveness, releasing both ourselves and others from the chains of resentment. Finally, Jesus leads us to ask for guidance and protection, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This line acknowledges our vulnerability and our need for God's strength. Life is full of challenges and temptations, but we are not alone. By asking for God's help, we admit that we can't navigate life's struggles on our own. It's a prayer of dependence, trusting that God will guide us and protect us from harm. Imagine the assurance that comes from knowing we are shielded by His presence, that we can face each day with confidence, knowing God walks beside us. The Lord's Prayer isn't just a set of words, it's a model for life. Each line reflects a way of living that centers on God's love, trust, and grace. It's a daily reminder that we are part of a larger story, connected to a loving Father and to each other. By living out the values of this prayer, we find strength, peace, and a purpose that aligns our hearts with God's. In His teachings, Jesus doesn't shy away from addressing the reality of sin and the importance of avoiding temptation. He speaks with urgency, using powerful imagery to convey just how seriously we should take anything that separates us from God. "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away," He says. While Jesus is not suggesting literal self-harm, He's emphasizing the gravity of sin. His words call us to be vigilant, to remove anything from our lives that could lead us astray. He challenges us to see sin not as a minor mistake, but as a real threat to our spiritual well-being. Jesus invites us to take a close look at our lives, to identify areas where temptation might have a foothold. He calls us to be proactive, to set boundaries and make choices that protect our hearts and minds. Whether it's certain habits, places, or relationships, Jesus encourages us to be honest with ourselves and to take bold steps to guard our spiritual health. Imagine the freedom that comes from removing distractions and temptations that pull us away from God's purpose for us. It's a call to live intentionally, making choices that reflect our commitment to a life of integrity. At the heart of this teaching is a choice between temporary pleasures and eternal values. Jesus reminds us that while some temptations may offer immediate satisfaction, they ultimately lead us away from the life God desires for us. He invites us to consider what we truly want: fleeting pleasure or lasting peace, the pull of sin or the joy of a pure heart. This decision shapes who we become and how close we draw to God. Imagine seeing every choice as an opportunity to prioritize God's path over temporary desires, growing in strength and character with each step we take toward Him. But Jesus also knows that we can't resist temptation on our own. In the Lord's Prayer, He teaches us to pray, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." This line reminds us that we are not in this struggle alone. God offers us His strength, His protection, and His guidance. By turning to Him in moments of weakness, we find the support we need to overcome. Jesus calls us to rely on God's presence, to seek His help and wisdom when faced with difficult choices. Imagine a life where, instead of relying on our own willpower, we lean into God's strength, trusting that He is there to deliver us. Through these words, Jesus invites us to a life of intentionality and purity, free from the burdens and distractions that sin brings. It's a call to walk closely with God, choosing His ways over anything that might pull us away. By embracing His guidance and protection, we find a path that leads to peace, integrity, and a deeper connection with the one who loves us unconditionally. In His teachings, Jesus reminds us of the profound impact our words have, both on others and on our own hearts. But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. With these words, He emphasizes that speech is never just idle. It carries weight, shaping the way we relate to others and reflecting the condition of our hearts. Our words can uplift and encourage, or they can tear down and wound. Jesus calls us to be intentional with our words, recognizing that they hold the power to bring life or harm. He also challenges us to speak with integrity, saying, "Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Jesus isn't only addressing formal promises, He's inviting us to live with honesty and consistency. When we are truthful and clear in our communication, others know they can trust us. Imagine the strength and trust we can build in our relationships if people know that our words are reliable, that we mean what we say without exaggeration or embellishment. This is integrity, living in such a way that our words and actions align. Jesus goes further, encouraging us to avoid harmful speech like gossip or criticism. These habits, while common, have the power to damage reputations, create division, and fill our hearts with negativity. Instead, He calls us to use our words to bless and build up others, to seek ways to bring encouragement rather than harm. Imagine the transformation in our relationships if we committed to using our words to uplift, to speak kindness into the lives of others, even when it's difficult. By choosing positive, intentional speech, we become a source of light in a world that often leans toward criticism and negativity. Jesus' teachings on words are a call to live with greater awareness and integrity. He invites us to consider our words as a reflection of our inner life. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. If our hearts are filled with love, humility, and grace, our words will naturally reflect these qualities. Conversely, if we harbor resentment or anger, it often reveals itself in what we say. Jesus is asking us to nurture a heart full of compassion so that our words become an outpouring of God's love and wisdom. Through this teaching, Jesus shows us that our speech is an essential part of a life aligned with God's will. He calls us to speak truthfully, avoid harmful speech, and use our words as instruments of encouragement. By embracing this way of speaking, we find that our words begin to reflect a transformed heart, one that seeks to bring healing, joy, and truth to those around us. As Jesus brings His teachings to a close, He shares a powerful parable that illustrates the importance of not only hearing His words but living by them. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. In this image of a house built on rock, Jesus offers a vision of stability, resilience, and strength. He shows us that a life rooted in His teachings is able to withstand the challenges and storms of life. Jesus contrasts this wise builder with a second, whom He calls foolish. The foolish builder constructs his house on sand, a foundation that appears solid but crumbles under pressure. When storms come, the house falls, revealing the fragility of a life built without a strong foundation. Through this parable, Jesus calls us to examine our own foundations. Are we building on values that endure, or are we relying on things that shift and fade with time? He invites us to choose a life grounded in truth and purpose, one that doesn't falter in times of trouble. He doesn't promise a life free from storms. Instead, He assures us that when we build our lives on His words, we have a strength that can weather any storm. Hardships, losses, and trials may come, but they do not have the power to shake us when our foundation is secure. Imagine the peace and confidence that come from knowing that our lives are anchored in something unchanging, something that provides strength and stability no matter what we face. Jesus is calling us to live with this resilience, to find our security not in circumstances, but in His teachings. To build on this foundation means more than just knowing His words. It means putting them into action in our daily lives. It's not enough to agree with His teachings or admire them. He invites us to embody them, to let them shape our choices, our relationships, and our priorities. Each small act of kindness, each step toward forgiveness, each moment of integrity and humility becomes a building block in a life that stands firm. In this closing parable, Jesus reminds us that our foundation is not just about personal security. It also equips us to be a source of stability and hope for others. As we build our lives on His teachings, we become a reflection of His strength and love, offering support and encouragement to those who may still be searching for a solid foundation. Jesus calls us not only to find our own stability in Him, but to become part of a community that builds one another up, creating a lasting legacy of faith. As Jesus concludes His teachings, He extends more than just a set of rules or guidelines. He offers an invitation, a call to a life that is radically different, one that reflects the values of God's kingdom rather than the values of the world. Throughout His teachings, Jesus has outlined a way of life that calls us to humility, compassion, forgiveness, and integrity. This invitation is not about following rules for the sake of obedience, but about experiencing a complete transformation of heart and mind. Jesus asks us to choose a different path, saying, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." The narrow road is not popular or easy. It often goes against the world's expectations and values. But it leads to true life, a life of purpose, peace, and fulfillment that comes from aligning our lives with God's will. Jesus is inviting us to take the path less traveled, to walk in faith even when it's difficult, knowing that this path leads to abundant life. He calls us to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. These words reflect our role in a world that often feels divided, dark, or hopeless. Salt preserves and adds flavor, while light illuminates and guides. Jesus is asking us to make a difference, to bring hope, love, and wisdom into our surroundings. He's calling us to be agents of change, to bring His kingdom values into every part of our lives, whether it's through kindness, justice, or simply living with compassion. Imagine the impact of a life that radiates God's love, that brings light into dark places, offering encouragement and hope to those around us. At the heart of this invitation is a love that defies the ordinary, a love that forgives enemies, prays for those who harm us, and chooses kindness over anger. Jesus challenges us to let go of resentment, to replace hostility with compassion, and to treat others as we wish to be treated. It's a call to love not only those who are easy to love, but also those who may be difficult. By choosing love over hate, forgiveness over revenge, we open ourselves to a life marked by peace and wholeness. This kind of love is transformative. It changes not only our own hearts, but the hearts of those we touch. Ultimately, Jesus' invitation is to live with an eternal perspective, to see beyond the temporary and focus on what has lasting value. He calls us to store up treasures in heaven, rather than becoming consumed by the pursuit of wealth, status, or approval. This shift in perspective frees us from the endless chase for worldly success and invites us to invest in things that truly matter: relationships, integrity, kindness, and faith. Living with this eternal perspective means focusing on values that endure, knowing that our lives have a purpose beyond the present moment. Jesus' invitation to a transformed life is not about perfection but about growth. It's a daily journey, a process of becoming more like Him as we learn to trust, forgive, and love. He understands our struggles and encourages us to lean on God's strength, to grow through our experiences, and to become people who reflect His heart in the world. Imagine the beauty of a life marked by this transformation, a life filled with peace, purpose, and a connection to God that guides every step. This is the life Jesus is inviting each of us to embrace, a life that, while challenging, leads to the true and lasting joy that comes from knowing and following Him. As we take in the full picture of Jesus' teachings, we see that they're not only timeless, but remarkably practical, offering a roadmap for living a life that's rooted in purpose, love, and integrity. The Sermon on the Mount, with all its wisdom, isn't just a guide for ancient times. It speaks to our daily lives, providing principles that shape how we navigate relationships, priorities, and even challenges in today's world. One of the simplest, yet most challenging applications is Jesus' call to love our enemies. In a fast-paced world where misunderstandings and conflicts arise daily, loving our enemies may feel overwhelming. But we can start small. Imagine the next time someone irritates you, whether it's an impatient driver or a difficult coworker. Instead of responding with frustration, take a moment to respond with patience or even say a short prayer for that person. By choosing kindness over anger in these small ways, we begin to soften our own hearts, creating a habit of compassion that grows over time. Jesus' words on judgment also resonate powerfully in today's world. Rather than jumping to conclusions about others, He encourages us to approach each person with humility and empathy. When we catch ourselves judging, we might pause and ask, what might this person be going through? What challenges could they be facing? Practicing this compassionate curiosity shifts our perspective, helping us to see others with understanding instead of criticism. This habit not only brings peace to our relationships, but deepens our own character. When it comes to anxiety, Jesus' invitation to not worry about tomorrow is a call to trust in God's provision. A practical way to embrace this teaching is by beginning each day with gratitude. Before diving into the day's worries, take a moment to acknowledge 3 things you're thankful for. This simple practice grounds us in the present, reminding us of God's ongoing care. And when worry arises, ask yourself, is this something I can control? If so, make a plan. If not, release it to God, trusting that He is aware of every detail. Our words, too, are powerful tools that Jesus encourages us to use thoughtfully. We can make a commitment to avoid harmful speech like gossip or criticism, choosing instead to use our words to uplift. Imagine the difference in your relationships if, for just 1 week, you made a conscious effort to avoid negative talk, focusing only on speaking encouragement and gratitude. Jesus' teaching reminds us that our words have the power to bring light into others' lives, and by using them to bless rather than harm, we reflect God's love. Jesus also speaks to the importance of building our lives on a solid foundation, urging us to prioritize eternal values over fleeting pursuits. In a culture that often emphasizes success and material gain, we can take time to examine where we're investing our energy. Are our resources going toward things that reflect God's love, like generosity, community, and service? By aligning our lives with these lasting values, we build a foundation that doesn't shift with circumstances, bringing us a deeper sense of purpose and peace. Finally, Jesus' teaching on temptation invites us to set healthy boundaries. If certain habits or situations lead us toward behaviors we want to avoid, we can take proactive steps, replacing negative influences with positive ones. By establishing routines that support our faith, like prayer, reading scripture, or serving others, we become stronger in moments of temptation, relying on God's strength to guide us. The teachings in the Sermon on the Mount are as relevant today as they were when Jesus first spoke them. They offer practical ways to live a life that honors God, builds peace in our relationships, and fulfills our deepest purpose. By applying these principles in our everyday actions, through small acts of love, humility, gratitude, encouraging words, and wise choices, we create a life that reflects the love, wisdom, and grace of God. This is the invitation Jesus extends to us, a path that leads not only to a richer life here and now, but to the peace and joy of a life. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to keep following more biblical stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us, and we want to hear your opinions and suggestions. May God bless you.